The Nordstrom receipt was still warm in my hands when I felt something shift inside my chest. Not anger, not even surprised anymore. Just a cold, crystalline clarity that cut through 26 years of conditioning like a blade through silk. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. 4,847.82 one shopping trip. 3 hours. My credit card. Madison stood in the doorway of my apartment, designer bags clustered around, her feet like expensive prayer offerings, her face flushed with the particular glow that only comes from spending someone else's money. She was arranging a coral Hermes scarf around her neck, the price tag still dangling like a tiny white flag of surrender. "Rach, you're going to die when you see what I got us," she said, not looking up from her reflection in my hallway mirror. "I mean, technically it's all stuff we can share. That's how families work, right?" I watched her smooth the silk against her collarbone, watched her tilt her chin to catch the light just so, watched her perform this small theater of ownership over something she'd bought with my name, my credit, my future. The receipt crackled between my fingers. "Madison." My voice came out steadier than I expected, quieter than I felt. "We need to talk." She finally looked at me then, really looked, and something in my expression made her hands pause mid-adjustment. For just a moment, I saw uncertainty flicker across her features like a shadow passing over water. But then she smiled, that practiced, disarming smile she'd been perfecting since we were kids. "Oh, come on. Don't be dramatic. It's not like I went crazy or anything." She gestured at the bags with a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "Besides, you always said what's mine is yours, right? So what's yours is mine." That was when I understood. Standing there in my own doorway, holding evidence of my sister's casual theft, watching her rearrange stolen silk around her throat, I finally understood that I had never been a sister to her. I had been a resource, a credit line with feelings, a bank account that occasionally asked for hugs. The clarity was devastating and liberating in equal measure. I folded the receipt once, twice, until it was small enough to fit in my palm. "Madison, do you know what my credit limit is?" She blinked, thrown by the question. No? Why does that matter?" $5,000. I held up the receipt. "You spent $4,847 in one afternoon." "Okay, but in 3 hours you spent nearly my entire available credit on—" I glanced at the bags scattered around her feet, a scarf, 2 purses, shoes, and what looks like half of the jewelry counter. Madison's chin lifted, that familiar, defiant angle I'd seen 1,000 times before. "It's not like you were using it. You never buy anything fun for yourself." "I was doing you a favor." "A favor?" "Yes. When was the last time you bought something that wasn't beige or black? When was the last time you treated yourself to anything that wasn't on sale?" Her voice was gaining steam now, sliding into the martyred tone she'd mastered sometime around high school. "I was trying to help you live a little." I stared at her. This woman who shared my DNA and nothing else, who stood in my apartment wearing my money and calling it a gift. The Hermes scarf caught the afternoon light streaming through my window, coral silk gleaming against her throat, like a beautiful wound. "Help me live a little," I repeated slowly. "Exactly. God, Rachel, you're 28 years old and you dress like you're 45. You drive a 10-year-old Honda. You live in this—" She gestured vaguely at my modest, 1-bedroom apartment, and you never do anything spontaneous. I thought maybe if I showed you how good it feels to have nice things, with my credit card. With our family's resources, yes. She said it like she was explaining basic math to a child. That's what families do. They share. They support each other. They don't keep score of every little thing. Every little thing. $4,847.82 was a little thing. I walked past her into my living room, away from the designer bags that seemed to glow with accusation in my periphery. Madison followed, her heels clicking against my hardwood floors like a countdown timer. "Look," she said, settling onto my couch with the fluid grace of someone who had never paid for anything in her life. "I know the number looks big, but it's not like I spent it on drugs or gambling or something stupid. These are investments. Classic pieces. The Hermes scarf alone will hold its value forever." I turned to face her. This stranger wearing my sister's face and my credit card debt. "Madison, I make $38,000 a year." She waved, a hand dismissively. "So, that's decent money. After taxes, after rent, after student loans, after car payments, after groceries and utilities and insurance, I have maybe $300 left each month. On a good month. Okay, but you spent 16 months of my discretionary income in 3 hours." The math seemed to land differently when I said it like that. Madison's expression shifted, uncertainty creeping back in around the edges. But she recovered quickly, switching tactics with the fluidity of someone who had spent a lifetime deflecting accountability. "Rachel, you're making this way more dramatic than it needs to be. It's not like I can't pay you back." "How? What do you mean, how?" "I mean, how are you going to pay me back nearly $5,000? What's your plan?" Madison's mouth opened, then closed. She pulled the coral scarf tighter around her neck, a gesture that might have looked elegant if not for the flash of panic in her eyes. I'm looking for jobs. And Derek said he might have some freelance work for me, graphic design stuff. It's not like I'm unemployed forever." Derek, her on-again, off-again boyfriend who lived in his parents' basement and sold vintage band t-shirts on eBay. The freelance work that had been coming any day now for the past 8 months. "When?" I asked simply. "When what?" "When will you pay me back? Give me a date." Madison shifted on my couch, suddenly finding my coffee table fascinating. "I don't know, Rachel. I can't give you an exact timeline. These things take time." "How much time? A month? 6 months? A year? I don't know." The words exploded out of her, sharp and defensive. "God, why are you being such a bitch about this? It's just money. Money comes and goes. Family is forever. Family is forever." I looked at this woman who had walked into my home, spent my financial security on silk scarves and leather handbags, and was now calling me a bitch for asking when she might pay me back. This woman who had never once, in our entire lives, bought me so much as a cup of coffee, who had never remembered my birthday without Mom's reminders, who had never asked how I was doing unless she needed something. Family is forever. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Madison fidgeted with her new scarf, avoiding my eyes. Outside, I could hear the sounds of normal life continuing. Traffic humming, neighbors talking, the world spinning forward while mine reorganized itself around this moment of absolute clarity. Finally, she looked up at me with those wide blue eyes that had gotten her out of trouble her entire life. "Look, I'm sorry, okay? I didn't think it would be such a big deal. You've always been so generous, so understanding. I thought—" She trailed off, but I could fill in the blanks. She thought I would roll over. She thought I would absorb this like I had absorbed everything else for the past decade. She thought I would smile and nod and ask if she needed anything else. She thought I would be the same Rachel who had been paying her phone bill for 3 years, the same Rachel who had co-signed her car loan, the same Rachel who had let her move into my apartment for just a few weeks, turned into 4 months of free rent and free food and free laundry service. She thought I would be the Rachel who believed that love meant saying yes to everything, no matter the cost. But Rachel was dissolving, molecule by molecule, as I stood there holding a receipt that represented more money than I had ever spent on myself in a single year. "Madison," I said quietly, "I want you to leave." Her head snapped up. "What?" "I want you to take your bags and leave my apartment." "Rachel, Come on. Don't be like this. Let's talk about it. We can figure something out. We can figure something out, I repeated. What does that mean exactly? She stood up, suddenly animated, like she'd found her footing again. It means we're sisters. It means we work together. It means maybe I can return some of this stuff if it's really such a problem for you. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Maybe. Well, some of it. The scarf, obviously, I can't return because I already took the tags off, and the shoes I already wore out of the store, but you wore $400 shoes out of the store. They're comfortable, and they look amazing with everything. You could borrow them anytime you want. I stared at her. This woman who had just spent my rent money on shoes she was already wearing, offering to let me borrow my own purchases. The absurdity of it was almost beautiful in its completeness. Get out, I said. Rachel, get out. She gathered her bags with sharp, angry movements, muttering under her breath about dramatic overreactions and family loyalty. The coral scarf fluttered around her neck like a flag of war. At the door, she turned back to me with tears in her eyes. Real tears, or at least real-looking ones. I can't believe you're choosing money over family, she said, her voice breaking in all the right places. I looked at her standing there, framed by my doorway, surrounded by designer bags purchased with my credit, my debt, my future financial security. I looked at her tears and her accusations and her wounded pride. I'm not choosing money over family, Madison, I said. I'm choosing me over you. And apparently, that's the same thing. She left without another word, her heels clicking down the hallway like a timer counting down to something I couldn't see yet, but somehow knew was coming. I closed the door behind her and stood in my suddenly quiet apartment, still holding the receipt. The paper was soft now from my handling, worn at the edges like an old prayer card. I unfolded it slowly, reading through the line items again. Hermes scarf, $380. Gucci handbag, $200. Jimmy Choo shoes, $450. Tiffany bracelet, $980. Each item was more than I spent on groceries in a month. Together, they represented a financial catastrophe I couldn't afford and hadn't chosen. But as I stood there in the aftermath of my sister's shopping spree and subsequent exit, I realized something. That surprised me. I wasn't shaking anymore. The panic that had been building since I'd opened my credit card statement that morning had settled into something cooler, something more solid. I walked to my kitchen and made myself a cup of coffee. Not because I needed the caffeine, but because I needed the ritual, the familiar motions that would ground me while my world rearranged itself around this new reality. Madison thought she had been doing me a favor, teaching me to live a little, showing me what it felt like to have nice things. But what she had actually done was show me exactly who she was. And more importantly, she had shown me exactly who I had been allowing myself to be. I pulled out my laptop and opened my banking app. The credit card balance glowed on the screen like a small red emergency, $4,147.82, nearly maxed out. One shopping trip away from financial disaster. But for the first time in years, maybe ever, I felt like I was finally seeing clearly. My sister had stolen my credit card and spent my money on luxury items she couldn't afford, then stood in my apartment and called it a favor. Called it family love. Called it sharing. And when I had asked her to leave, she had called me selfish. The audacity was breathtaking, but so was the clarity it brought. I finished my coffee and opened a new document on my laptop. Time to make some lists. Time to make some phone calls. Time to figure out exactly how deep this hole went and exactly how I was going to climb out of it. Because one thing had become crystal clear in the space between Madison's tears and her accusations. This wasn't the first time. This was just the first time I was awake enough to see it. The first time it happened, I was 16 and Madison was 13. She'd broken Mom's favorite vase while practicing her cheerleading routine in the living room, and the pieces were scattered across the hardwood floor like accusations when Mom walked through the front door. Madison's eyes went wide with panic, but not the kind that comes with genuine remorse. It was the panic of someone calculating their escape route. She looked at the shattered ceramic, then at me, and I watched her face shift into something I wouldn't have recognized as manipulation if I hadn't seen it so many times since. "Rachel," she whispered, grabbing my arm, "you have to help me. Mom's going to kill me." I stared at the mess, at my sister's pleading face, at the way she automatically assumed I would fix this for her. And I did. I told Mom I'd been practicing dance moves and knocked it over by accident. Mom was disappointed but understanding. She'd bought the vase on her honeymoon with Dad, but accidents happen, right? Madison never thanked me. She just smiled and went back to her homework like nothing had happened. That should have been my first clue. But back then, I thought it was normal. I thought it was what big sisters did. I thought taking responsibility for other people's mistakes was the same thing as love. I was wrong. Growing up in the Morrison household meant understanding your role and playing it perfectly. Dad was the breadwinner, distant but reliable, always traveling for work. Mom was the peacekeeping diplomat, smoothing over conflicts before they could disturb the family's carefully maintained harmony. Madison was the star, the one who got the applause and the attention and the automatic forgiveness when things went wrong, and I was the foundation. The one who held everything together from underneath where nobody could see. "Rachel's so responsible," Mom would say to her friends, her voice warm with pride. "I never have to worry about her. She's got such an old soul." At 12, I thought that was a compliment. At 28, I understood it was a life sentence. The pattern started small, the way these things always do. Madison would forget her lunch money, and I'd share mine. She'd accidentally leave her science project until the last minute, and I'd stay up until 2 a.m. helping her finish it. She'd break something or lose something or mess something up, and somehow it became my responsibility to fix it. Mom called it sisterly love. Dad called it looking out for each other. Madison called it Tuesday. By the time I was 17, I had a part-time job at the local coffee shop, saving money for college. Madison was 14 and had discovered the mall. She'd started asking for small loans, $5 here, $10 there. Money for lunch, money for a movie, money for a bracelet she simply had to have. "I'll pay you back," she'd say. And I believed her. For months, I believed her. But the money never came back. When I'd ask about it, she'd look at me with genuine confusion, like I was speaking a foreign language. "I thought that was a gift," she'd say. "I thought you were just being nice." And somehow, I'd end up apologizing for asking. The summer before my senior year, Madison wanted to go to cheerleading camp. It cost $800. Mom and Dad had the money, but they were saving for a kitchen renovation. They sat Madison down and explained that camp wasn't in the budget this year. Madison cried for 3 days straight. On the 4th day, she came to my room where I was filling out college applications and sat on my bed with the defeated posture of someone whose world had just ended. "I'm going to be the only one who doesn't go to camp," she said, her voice small and broken. "The only one. Do you know how humiliating that's going to be?" I looked up from my applications, at my sister's tear-streaked face, at the way she was clutching a crumpled camp brochure like a funeral program. "Maybe you could get a job," I suggested. "Babysit or something. $800 isn't impossible to make in a few months." Madison looked at me like I'd suggested she rob a bank. "Rachel, I can't work all summer. I have to practice. And besides, what kind of job could I get? I'm 14. "I was working at 14. "Yeah, but you're different. You're good at that stuff. I'm not built for regular jobs." I stared at her, the this girl who shared my DNA but apparently none of my understanding of how the world worked. Not built for regular jobs. At 14, Madison, everyone has to work eventually. Not everyone, she said, and there was something in her voice that made me look up from my applications. Some people are lucky enough to have families who support their dreams. The guilt hit me like a physical blow. Here I was, sitting on $800 I'd saved from months of early morning shifts and late night studying, while my sister's dreams were crumbling around her. I could lend you the money, I heard myself say. For camp. Madison's face transformed. The tears stopped, the despair vanished, and suddenly she was animated again, throwing her arms around my neck and calling me the best sister in the world. I'll pay you back as soon as I can, she promised. I swear. You're literally saving my life right now. I wrote the check that afternoon. $800. Nearly everything I'd saved for college expenses. Madison never paid me back. When I brought it up in the fall, she reminded me that she was just a freshman in high school with no income. When I brought it up the following summer, she was preparing for her sophomore year and needed to focus on her grades. When I brought it up during her junior year, she was too busy with college prep and SAT tutoring. By the time she graduated high school, the debt had somehow become my gift to her. A generous gesture from a loving sister who wanted to support her dreams. Besides, Mom said when I mentioned it during Madison's graduation party, you're doing fine. You got into state with that scholarship. Madison's going to need more help than you did. That should have been my second clue. College was supposed to be my escape. 4 hours away from home, living in a dorm, making my own decisions for the first time in my life. But somehow, Madison's problems followed me there. The calls started my sophomore year. Madison was struggling in high school, socially and academically. She needed a tutor, but Mom and Dad couldn't afford one. Could I help? Just this once? $200 for a math tutor. I worked extra shifts at the campus bookstore to make it happen. Then her car broke down and she needed money for repairs. Then she wanted to go on a senior trip with her friends. But it was too expensive. Then she needed a new laptop for college applications. Each request came with tears, with promises, with explanations about how this was absolutely the last time she'd need to ask. Each request came with careful timing, usually right after I'd gotten a good grade or received praise from a professor, when I was feeling successful and generous. Each request came with the same underlying message. If I really loved her, I'd help. And I did help. Every time. Because that's what big sisters do, right? That's what family means. By the time I graduated college, I'd given Madison over $3,000. Not loaned, given. Because somehow, every loan had transformed into a gift through the alchemy of time and selective memory. When I pointed this out during my graduation dinner, Madison looked genuinely hurt. I thought you gave me that money because you wanted to help me, she said, her eyes filling with tears. I thought it was because you loved me. I had no idea you were keeping track. Keeping track. Like remembering what someone owes you is a character flaw. Dad cleared his throat uncomfortably. Rachel, honey, your sister's still in high school. She'll have plenty of time to pay you back once she's working. Mom nodded enthusiastically. Besides, you're doing so well. That job at the marketing firm is going to be wonderful. You've always been so good with money. Good with money. That was the phrase they used when they wanted me to share mine. The pattern continued through Madison's college years, which she attended on a combination of loans, scholarships, and my increasingly frequent gifts. She needed money for textbooks, for rent, for food, for the sorority she simply had to join, for the spring break trip that would be networking, for the internship that didn't pay but would look great on her resume. Each time I found myself saying yes. Each time I told myself it was the last time. Each time I believed her when she promised to pay me back once she graduated and got a real job. Madison graduated with a degree in communications and a complete inability to find work that met her standards. The marketing jobs didn't pay enough. The PR positions weren't creative enough. The social media roles were beneath her skill level. She moved back home for what was supposed to be a temporary situation while she figured out her next step. Temporary turned into 6 months, then a year, then 2 years. During that time, I was working my way up at a small marketing agency, living in a studio apartment, and slowly building the life I'd dreamed of since college. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. Madison, meanwhile, was living rent-free in our childhood bedroom, occasionally applying for jobs that she had no intention of taking and developing an expensive coffee habit that she couldn't afford. "I need to maintain my image," she explained when I suggested she might want to cut back on the daily Starbucks runs. "Networking is about perception. If I look like I can't afford nice things, people won't take me seriously." She was unemployed and drinking $8 lattes. I was working 50-hour weeks and making coffee at home to save money. But somehow, I was the one who was supposed to understand. The requests became more frequent and more expensive. Her car needed new tires. She wanted to take a photography class. She needed a professional wardrobe for job interviews that never seemed to materialize. She wanted to try therapy, but couldn't afford it. She needed to go to a wedding in California, but flights were so expensive. Each time, I found myself reaching for my wallet. Each time, I told myself it was helping the family. Each time, I ignored the growing resentment that was building in my chest like a tumor. The breaking point should have been when she asked me to co-sign her lease. She'd finally found an apartment she liked, a trendy one-bedroom in the arts district that cost twice what I was paying for my studio. But she needed a co-signer because she had no credit history and no steady income. "It's just a formality," she assured me. "I'll be getting a job any day now, and even if something happens, you know I'm responsible. I'd never leave you hanging." I signed the papers, because that's what family does, right? 3 months later, Madison lost her part-time retail job for showing up late too many times. She couldn't make rent. Guess who got the call? "It's just this once," she promised, crying over the phone. "I have 3 interviews lined up next week. I just need to get through this month." I paid her rent, and the next month, and the month after that. By the time Madison finally got another job, I'd paid 4 months of her rent in addition to my own. My savings account was depleted. My credit card was carrying a balance for the first time in my adult life. But Madison was grateful. She took me out for a celebratory dinner at an expensive restaurant to thank me for everything I'd done. She ordered the most expensive item on the menu and 2 glasses of wine. When the check came, she looked at me expectantly. "I'm still getting back on my feet financially," she said with a sheepish smile. "Rain check on picking up the tab?" I paid for my own thank you dinner. That should have been my 3rd clue, but I was too deep in the pattern to see it clearly. The job Madison finally got was at a boutique marketing agency, the kind of place that valued style over substance and paid accordingly. She made just enough to cover her rent, her car payment, and her lifestyle, but not enough to pay me back. "I'm living paycheck to paycheck," she'd say whenever I brought up the money she owed me. "But as soon as I get that promotion, I'll start paying you back. I promise." The promotion never came, the payback never happened. But the requests for help continued. Her car needed repairs. Her laptop died. She wanted to take a vacation to decompress from work stress. She needed professional headshots for her LinkedIn profile. She wanted to take a weekend trip to visit college friends. Each request was reasonable on its own. Each request came with a detailed explanation of why she needed it and why she couldn't afford it herself. Each request came with a promise to pay me back as soon as her financial situation improved. And each time, I said yes. Because by then, saying no felt impossible. It felt cruel. It felt like abandoning my family. But what I didn't understand then was that Madison had never seen me as family. She'd seen me as a solution to her problems, a walking, talking safety net that would always be there to catch her when she fell. And I'd been so busy trying to be a good sister that I'd never asked myself why she kept falling. The pattern had been set for over a decade by the time Madison walked into my apartment with those designer bags. 12 years of small requests that became big demands. 12 years of promises that became excuses. 12 years of me saying yes, because I thought that's what love looked like. I'd given her thousands of dollars over the years. I'd co-signed loans I didn't benefit from. I'd paid her rent, her car insurance, her phone bill, her credit card minimum payments. I'd bought her groceries, paid for her gas, and covered her portion of family gifts. And in return, she'd learned that I would always say yes, that I would always be there, that I would always choose her comfort over my own financial security. She'd learned that my money was her money, and my credit was her credit, and my future was something she could borrow against indefinitely. The designer shopping spree wasn't an anomaly. It was the inevitable conclusion of a pattern that had been building for years, and I'd been so focused on being a good sister that I'd never noticed I was being a terrible daughter to myself. The silence, after Madison left, was different from any quiet I'd ever experienced. It wasn't peaceful or restful. It was the kind of silence that comes after an explosion, when the dust is still settling and you're not sure what's left standing. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, staring at my credit card account. The numbers glowed on the screen, like a neon sign advertising my own stupidity. But for the first time, I wasn't looking at the current balance. I was scrolling through months of statements, tracing patterns I'd been too busy enabling to notice. The designer shopping spree wasn't an isolated incident. It was just the loudest note in a symphony of financial abuse I'd been conducting for years. There was the charge from 3 months ago, $347 at Sephora. I'd assumed Madison had used her own card when we went shopping together that day. I remembered her saying something about treating herself after a hard week at work. I'd even complimented her on being financially responsible. 2 months before that, $156 at a fancy restaurant downtown. The same night, Madison had texted me photos of her dinner with friends, gushing about how amazing the food was. I'd been eating ramen at home, wondering how she could afford such expensive meals on her salary. Now I know. She couldn't afford it. She'd never been paying for it. I scrolled further back, my stomach tightening with each discovery. A $89 charge at Victoria's Secret. A $234 charge at Anthropologie. Multiple charges at Target, Whole Foods, gas stations I'd never been to in neighborhoods where Madison lived and worked. She'd been using my credit card for months, not just for emergencies or special occasions, but for everything. Her entire lifestyle had been funded by my credit line, and I'd been too trusting to notice. My hands were shaking as I reached for my phone. I needed to call the credit card company, report the unauthorized charges, and start the process of fraud protection. But as I started to dial, something stopped me. These weren't really unauthorized charges, were they? Madison had been using my card with my knowledge, at least initially. I'd given her my card information for emergencies. I'd told her she could use it if she really needed something important. But when did groceries and makeup and restaurant meals become emergencies? When had my definition of important expanded to include every want and whim Madison had? I set the phone down and kept scrolling through the statements. The pattern was clear once I knew to look for it. Madison would use the card for small purchases. At first, things that could reasonably be called necessities. Then the amounts would gradually increase, the purchases would become more frequent, and suddenly my credit line was being used as her personal shopping fund. The most disturbing part wasn't the money, though that was devastating enough. It was the calculated nature of it. The way she'd tested my boundaries, pushed a little further each time, groomed me to accept larger and larger violations of my Financial security. I pulled out a notebook and started making lists. Every charge I could identify as Madison's. Every time she'd asked to borrow money and never paid it back. Every bill I'd paid on her behalf. Every loan I'd co-signed. Every financial emergency I'd helped her solve. The numbers were staggering. Over the past 5 years alone, I'd given Madison more than $15,000. Not including the credit card charges I was just now discovering. Not including the opportunity cost of the savings I'd depleted, the investments I'd never made, the financial security I'd sacrificed. $15,000. More than I made in 6 months. Gone. But it wasn't just the money. As I sat there with my calculator and my growing lists, I realized the financial theft was just the surface layer of something much deeper. Madison had been stealing my trust, my peace of mind, my ability to plan for my own future. She'd been taking my generosity and weaponizing it against me, using my love for her as a tool to extract whatever she wanted. The thought made me physically nauseous. I closed the laptop and went to my bedroom, needing space to process what I'd discovered. But as I passed my dresser, something caught my eye. My jewelry box was slightly open, the lid not quite flush the way I always left it. My heart began to race as I opened it fully. Everything looked normal at first glance. My grandmother's pearl. Earrings were still there, along with the watch my parents had given me for college graduation. But something felt wrong. I opened the small compartment where I kept my more valuable pieces. The diamond stud earrings I'd bought myself after my first promotion were gone. So was the gold bracelet my college roommate had given me as a graduation gift. And the sapphire ring that had belonged to my great-aunt. The one piece of jewelry I considered truly irreplaceable. Gone. All of it. I sank onto my bed, the betrayal hitting me like a physical blow. Madison hadn't just been using my credit card. She'd been going through my apartment, taking whatever she wanted, assuming I wouldn't notice or wouldn't care enough to confront her about it. How long had this been happening? How many times had she been in my apartment when I wasn't home, helping herself to my belongings like she was shopping in her own closet? I thought about all the times she'd asked to borrow my keys, all the times she'd dropped by unexpectedly and I'd been grateful for the company, all the times she'd complimented something I owned, asking where I'd gotten it, how much it cost, commenting on how lucky I was to be able to afford nice things. She hadn't been making conversation. She'd been taking inventory. The realization was like ice water in my veins. This wasn't just financial irresponsibility or poor impulse control. This was systematic theft. Calculated, premeditated, ongoing theft from someone who was supposed to love me. I grabbed my phone and called Madison. It went straight to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. On the third try, she picked up. Rachel? Look, I know you're upset. But where are my earrings? Silence on the other end of the line. What earrings? My diamond studs. The ones I bought myself after my promotion. They're missing from my jewelry box. I don't know what you're talking about. But her voice had changed. Gone was the confident, slightly condescending tone she'd used earlier. Now she sounded nervous, caught off guard. Madison, I know you took them. I know you took the bracelet too and the sapphire ring. I want them back. Rachel, you're being paranoid. Why would I take your jewelry? I have my own jewelry. Do you? Because according to my credit card statements, you've been buying quite a lot of jewelry lately. With my money. Another long silence. I can explain that, she said finally. I'm sure you can. You've gotten very good at explaining things over the years. But I don't want explanations anymore, Madison. I want my property back. Look, maybe I borrowed a few things here and there, but I was going to return them. I just wanted to wear something nice to a few events, and you have so many beautiful pieces that just sit in your jewelry box. You stole from me. I didn't steal anything. I borrowed some jewelry from my sister. That's not stealing. That's what family does. There it was. Again. The magic word that was supposed to absolve her of any wrongdoing, any responsibility, any consequences. Family. Madison, using someone's credit card without permission is theft. Taking someone's belongings without asking is theft. The fact that we're related doesn't change the law. Oh my God, you're not going to call the police, are you? Rachel, please. Think about what this would do to the family. Think about mom and dad. Think about mom and dad. Not think about me, the person she'd been robbing. Not think about the damage she'd done to my financial security or my ability to trust anyone. Think about how her consequences might affect other people. Where are you right now? I asked. I'm at Derek's. Derek's. Of course. Her unemployed boyfriend with the rich parents and the flexible relationship with other people's property. I want my jewelry back by tomorrow, Madison. All of it. And I want you to stop using my credit card. I'm changing all the numbers and canceling your access. Rachel, please don't do this. We can work something out. I can pay you back. How? You don't have a job. You don't have any savings. You don't have any assets except for the things you've stolen from me. I'm working. I have that part-time thing at the boutique. 20 hours a week at $12 an hour. That's barely enough to cover your phone bill, let alone pay me back thousands of dollars. I could hear her crying now, and for a moment, I felt the familiar tug of guilt. This was my sister. My baby sister who had always been fragile, who had always needed protection and support. Maybe I was being too hard on her. Maybe there was a way to work this out that didn't involve lawyers or police or permanent damage to our relationship. But then I looked at my laptop screen, where my credit card statement was still glowing with evidence of her betrayal. I thought about my empty jewelry box, about the years of broken promises and manipulative tears, about the systematic way she'd been bleeding me dry while calling it love. Madison, I said quietly, I need you to understand something. This isn't about the money. It's not even about the jewelry. It's about the fact that you've been lying to me for years. You've been using me, manipulating me, and stealing from me while letting me believe we had a loving relationship. We do have a loving relationship. I love you, Rachel. You're my sister. No, Madison. You love what I can do for you. You love my bank account and my credit line and my inability to say no. But you don't love me. If you loved me, you wouldn't have been able to do any of this. The crying got louder, more dramatic. I could picture her at Derek's apartment, probably performing this whole conversation for his benefit, casting herself as the victim of her unreasonable sister. You're wrong, she sobbed. I do love you. I love you so much. I made some mistakes. I got in over my head. But I can fix this. I can make it right. How? I'll get a better job. I'll sell some of my things. I'll move back home to save money. I'll do whatever it takes. It was the same script she'd been using for years. The same promises, the same tears, the same vague commitments to change that never resulted in actual change. But this time, I wasn't buying it. Madison, I've heard all of this before. After the cheerleading camp money, after the college loans, after the co-signed lease, after every single time you've taken something from me and promised to make it right. But you never do. You just wait for the heat to die down, and then you start taking again. This is different. How is it different? Because I know I hurt you. I know I messed up. I never want to hurt you like this again. You didn't know you were hurting me when you maxed out my credit card? You didn't know you were hurting me when you stole my jewelry? You didn't know you were hurting me when you called me a bitch for asking when you'd pay me back? Silence. Madison, I think you knew exactly what you were doing. I think you've always known. I think you just didn't care because you knew I'd never stop you. That's not true. Isn't it? Tell me honestly, when you walked into Nordstrom today with my credit card, did you think about whether I could afford those purchases? Did you think about what it would do to my finances? Did you think about me at all? The silence stretched so long I thought she'd hung up. I thought you'd be okay with it, she said finally, her voice small. You always figure things out. You always make it work somehow. There it was, the truth finally. She'd thought I'd be okay with it because I always was. Because I'd spent 12 years teaching her that my financial well-being was less important than her immediate desires. Because I'd trained her to see me as an unlimited resource rather than a person with my own needs and limits. Well, I'm not okay with it, Madison. I'm not okay with any of it, and I'm not going to make it work this time. What does that mean? It means I'm done. I'm done paying your bills. I'm done lending you money. I'm done pretending that your financial emergencies are my responsibility. I'm done being your personal ATM. Rachel, please. You're all I have. No, Madison. I'm all you've been taking. From? There's a difference. I hung up before she could respond. My hands were trembling as I set the phone down, but it wasn't from anger or fear. It was from relief. For the first time in my adult life, I'd said no to my sister and meant it. I'd drawn a line in the sand and refused to let her manipulate me into crossing it. The phone rang immediately. Madison called back, probably to try a different approach, a different manipulation tactic. I declined the call and turned off the phone. I went back to my laptop and started researching. How to dispute credit card charges, how to file a police report for theft, how to protect yourself from financial abuse by family members. I'd never thought of it as abuse before. Madison had always framed her requests as temporary emergencies, her promises as sincere intentions. She'd made me feel like helping her was my choice, my generous decision as a loving sister. But as I read article after article about financial abuse, I recognized pattern after pattern. The gradual escalation of requests, the manipulation through guilt and family obligation, the way the victim's own generosity gets weaponized against them, the systematic erosion of financial security disguised as family loyalty. I wasn't just Madison's sister, I was her victim. The realization should have been devastating, but instead it was liberating, because victims can choose to stop being victims. They can set boundaries, protect themselves, and refuse to participate in their own exploitation. For 12 years, I'd been an unwilling participant in my own financial destruction. But that ended today. I opened a new document on my laptop and started typing a list of every account Madison had access to, every automatic payment she might know about, every way she could continue to access my money. Tomorrow, I will start changing everything. New credit cards, new banking passwords, new financial boundaries that she couldn't cross. But first, I had a phone call to make. I turned my phone back on and dialed my parents' number. It was time to have a conversation that was 12 years overdue. I woke up at 5:30 a.m. the next morning, not because my alarm went off, but because my mind had been working all night like a computer running background processes. While I'd slept, my subconscious had been organizing, planning, preparing for the systematic dismantling of 12 years of financial vulnerability. The first thing I did was make coffee, strong coffee, the kind that would keep me sharp for what was about to be a very long day. The second thing I did was open my laptop and create a new folder on my desktop, Project Independence. If Madison wanted to treat this like a business transaction, then I'd approach it like the marketing professional I was, with strategy, documentation, and measurable objectives. By 6 a.m., I had 3 documents open: a timeline of financial abuse, an asset recovery plan, and a security protocol checklist. I wasn't going to confront this situation with emotions or family guilt. I was going to handle it with the same methodical approach I used for client campaigns at work. The first order of business was damage control. I called my credit card company as soon as their customer service line opened at 7 a.m. The representative, a woman named Patricia with a kind voice and professional demeanor, listened patiently as I explained the situation. "So you're saying someone has been using your card without permission for several months?" she asked. "Yes, but it's complicated. It's my sister, and initially I had given her permission to use it for emergencies, but she's been using it for personal shopping without telling me." "I understand. That's actually more common than you might think, especially with family members. We can flag your account for unusual activity going forward, and I can issue you a new card with different numbers immediately. The new card will be expedited and should arrive by tomorrow." Within 20 minutes, Madison's access to my credit line was completely cut off. Her stored payment information on every website she'd been using would no longer work. Her mental picture of my credit card number, which she'd apparently memorized, was now useless. It felt like installing the first lock on a door I hadn't realized was wide open. Next, I called my bank. Changing my debit card number was easy, but the checking account was more complicated. Madison had been making mobile deposits to my account for over a year, ostensibly to pay me back for various loans, though the deposits had stopped coming months ago while the requests for money had continued. "I need to remove all external access to this account," I told the bank representative. "No one else should be able to make deposits, withdrawals, or transfers." "We can set up additional security measures," he explained. "A verbal password that's required for any phone transactions, and we can flag the account to require in-person verification for any changes to authorized users or beneficiaries." By 9 a.m., Madison's access to my financial life had been systematically eliminated. She couldn't use my cards, couldn't access my accounts, and couldn't manipulate my banking information. For the first time in years, my money was completely under my own control. But protection was only the first phase. Recovery was going to be more complex. I opened a new spreadsheet and began documenting everything. Every credit card charge I could identify as Madison's, with dates, amounts, and merchant information. Every piece of jewelry that was missing from my collection, with photographs I'd taken for insurance purposes and estimated replacement values. Every cash loan she'd never repaid, every bill I'd paid on her behalf, every financial emergency I'd solved for her over the past 5 years. The process was tedious and emotionally exhausting, like performing surgery on my own financial history. But it was also revealing. Patterns emerged that I'd never noticed when I was living through them day by day. Madison's spending had seasonal spikes. She always needed more money around the holidays, during summer months when she wanted to travel, and in spring when she got restless and decided she needed a wardrobe refresh. Her emergencies coincidentally aligned with sales events at high-end retailers. More disturbing was the correlation between my own financial milestones and Madison's requests for help. Every time I got a raise, a bonus, or a tax refund, Madison would have a crisis within weeks. It was as if she'd been monitoring my financial health and timing her needs accordingly. The realization made my skin crawl. This wasn't just opportunistic borrowing. This was systematic harvesting. By noon, I had 15 pages of documented financial abuse. The total came to $23,147 over 5 years. Nearly $24,000 that I'd given, loaned, or had, stolen by my own sister. I saved the document and backed it up to 3 different cloud services. Then I printed 2 copies and put them in separate locations. If this escalated to legal action, I wanted ironclad documentation. The next step was research. I spent 2 hours reading about financial abuse, identity theft, and fraud committed by family members. The legal landscape was more complex than I'd expected. While Madison had technically committed theft and fraud, proving criminal intent when there was a history of authorized use would be challenging, but civil recovery was a different matter. I could pursue restitution through small claims court. I could report the unauthorized credit card use as fraud, and I could take steps to recover my stolen property through police reports and insurance claims. I also discovered something called a cease and desist letter, which I could send to formally notify Madison that she was no longer authorized to use my financial information and that any future use would be considered theft. I found a template online and spent an hour crafting a version specific to my situation. The language was formal, legal, and left no room for interpretation. It outlined exactly what Madison was prohibited from doing, specified the consequences of violation, and established a clear paper trail of my intent to protect my assets. I printed the letter on my company letterhead to make it look more official and scheduled it for certified mail delivery. Madison would receive it within 48 hours, and I'd have legal proof that she'd been officially notified of the boundaries. But the financial protection was only half the battle. I also needed to address the family dynamics that had enabled this situation for so long. I spent an hour crafting emails to my parents. Not accusatory rants or emotional appeals, but factual summaries of the situation with supporting documentation attached. I included screenshots of credit card statements, photos of the empty spaces in my jewelry box, and a timeline of financial support I'd provided Madison over the years. The subject line was simple: Important family financial matter. Please review. Didn't send the emails immediately. Instead, I saved them in my drafts folder and went for a walk around my neighborhood to clear my head. The afternoon air was crisp and clean, a sharp contrast to the suffocating family dynamics I'd been analyzing all morning. As I walked, I thought about what I wanted to achieve through all this strategy and planning. I didn't want revenge exactly. I didn't want to destroy Madison or humiliate her publicly. But I also couldn't continue being her personal funding source. While she contributed nothing to my life except stress and financial insecurity, what I wanted was simple. I wanted my stolen property returned. I wanted Madison to stop using my financial accounts, and I wanted her to acknowledge what she'd done and make a genuine effort to pay me back. But I also wanted something harder to quantify. I wanted my family to see me as a person rather than a resource. I wanted them to understand that I had needs, limits, and boundaries that deserved respect. When I got back to my apartment, I had 3 missed calls from Madison and 2 text messages. Rachel, we need to talk. I can explain everything. Please don't do anything crazy. Think about the family. I ignored both messages and turned my attention to the next phase of my strategy, building a support system outside my family. I called my college roommate, Jennifer, who now lived in Seattle and worked as a financial planner. We hadn't talked in months, but she picked up on the second ring. Rachel. This is such a weird coincidence. I was just thinking about you yesterday. Hey, Jen, I need some advice, and you're the only person I know who understands both money and toxic family dynamics. I gave her the abbreviated version of the story, focusing on the financial aspects rather than the emotional manipulation. Jennifer listened without interrupting, occasionally making small sounds of disbelief or sympathy. Holy shit, Rachel, she said when I finished. I'm so sorry. But also, I'm proud of you for finally seeing this clearly. You knew? I suspected. Remember when Madison came to visit you during our senior year? She kept asking about your internship, salary, and whether you were saving money. Then she started talking about how nice it must be to have a family who could help when things got tough. It felt calculating. Why didn't you say anything? Would you have listened? You were so determined to be the good sister, the responsible one. I figured you'd have to come to this realization on your own. Jennifer helped me think through the financial recovery process and recommended a lawyer who specialized in financial disputes. She also gave me the name of a therapist who worked specifically with people who'd experienced financial abuse by family members. This is going to get messier before it gets better, she warned. Family members who've been taking advantage of someone financially don't usually go quietly when the money stops flowing. You need to be prepared for guilt trips, manipulation, and potentially some pretty ugly confrontations. After I hung up with Jennifer, I called my landlord and arranged to have my locks changed. Madison had been using my apartment as her personal storage and shopping facility for too long. That access ended today. I also called a home security company and scheduled an installation for next week. Cameras, motion sensors, the works. If Madison decided to escalate this situation, I wanted evidence. By evening, I had transformed my life, from financially vulnerable to systematically protected. New credit cards, new bank access codes, documented evidence of the abuse, legal notification in progress, and professional support lined up. But the most important change was internal. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like I was in control of my own financial destiny. Nobody else had access to my money unless I explicitly granted it. Nobody else could make financial decisions that affected my security without my knowledge and consent. The phone rang around 8 p.m. Mom's number. I let it go to voicemail. She called again 10 minutes later. This time I answered. Rachel, honey, Madison, is very upset. She said you accused her of stealing and that you're closing all your accounts. What's going on? I took a deep breath. This was the conversation I'd been preparing for all day. Mom, Madison has been using my credit card without permission for months. She's also taken jewelry from my apartment. When I confronted her about it, she called me a bitch and said I was choosing money over family. Oh, honey, I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding. Madison would never steal from you. You girls have always shared everything. We've never shared everything, Mom. I've been giving Madison money for years while she's contributed nothing to my life except debt and stress. Rachel, that's not fair. Madison loves you very much. She's just going through a rough patch right now. A rough patch that's lasted 5 years? You know how hard it's been for young people to find good jobs. Madison is doing her best. I looked at my laptop screen, where my spreadsheet of financial abuse was still open. $23,847 of Madison's best. Mom, I've documented nearly $24,000 that Madison has taken from me over the past 5 years. That's not a rough patch. That's systematic theft. Silence. On the other end of the line, I'm going to email you some information, I continued. I want you and Dad to look at it before we talk again. Really look at it, with numbers and dates and evidence. Rachel, please don't make this bigger than it needs to be. Can't you girls just work this out between yourselves? We tried that. Madison told me I was being dramatic and that family shares everything, so now I'm handling it like the theft that it is. I hung up before she could respond and immediately sent the emails I'd prepared to both parents. Then I opened a bottle of wine and sat down to plan phase 2, the confrontation and recovery process. Tomorrow, Madison would receive the cease and desist letter. My parents would read the documentation of their younger daughter's financial crimes against their older daughter, and I would start the process of demanding that my stolen property be returned and my debts be repaid. For 12 years, I'd been playing defense in a game I didn't realize I was losing, but starting tomorrow, I was going on offense, and I was playing to win. The certified mail receipt arrived in my email at 10:47 a.m. on Thursday. Madison had signed for the cease and desist letter at 9:32 a.m. I screenshot the confirmation and added it to my Project Independence folder, then sat back and waited. I didn't have to wait long. My phone started ringing at 11:15 a.m., Madison's number. I let it go to voicemail. She called back immediately. I declined the call. On the third attempt, I turned my phone to silent and went back to work. By lunchtime, I had 12 missed calls from Madison, 4 from my mother, and 2 from my father. The text messages started coming in waves around 2 p.m. Madison, are you seriously threatening to sue me? Madison, this is insane, Rachel. Over what? Some credit card charges? Madison, I can't believe you're trying to destroy our family over money. Mom, please call me. Your father and I read the email. We need to talk about this as a family. Dad, Rachel, your mother is very upset. Can we discuss this reasonably? Madison, Derek's parents are lawyers. They said your letter is harassment. I read each message without responding. feeling a strange sense of calm settle over me. The panic, the tears, the dramatic language. It was all so predictable. This was Madison's standard playbook when she couldn't get what she wanted through charm and manipulation. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't reacting to it. I wasn't rushing to smooth things over or find a compromise that would restore family harmony at my expense. I was just watching the storm rage while staying safely inside my newly constructed boundaries. At 5 p.m., I finally responded to my parents with a single message. I'm available to talk on Saturday at 2 p.m. My apartment. I chose my apartment deliberately. This conversation was happening on my territory, with my documentation easily accessible, and with the advantage of being able to end it whenever I chose. Friday passed in relative quiet. A few more angry texts from Madison, which I didn't respond, to a voicemail from Mom asking if I was really sure about making such a big deal out of this. Radio silence from Dad, which was somehow more ominous than anything else. I spent Friday evening preparing for Saturday's conversation like I was preparing for the most important client presentation of my career. I organized my documentation into clear categories: unauthorized credit card charges, stolen property, unpaid loans, and a timeline of broken promises. I printed everything and put it in labeled folders. I also rehearsed. Standing in front of my bathroom mirror, I practiced delivering key points in a calm, factual tone. No tears, no raised voices, no emotional manipulation. Just facts, boundaries, and consequences. Madison has been using my credit card without permission for over 6 months, I said to my reflection. The total unauthorized charges exceed $4,000. This is theft, not family sharing. Mirror Rachel looked determined and professional. Nothing like the weepy, guilt-ridden pushover who had been enabling Madison's behavior for over a decade. Saturday morning, I cleaned my apartment and made sure everything looked calm and organized. I wanted the environment to reinforce the message. This was a serious conversation being handled by a serious person who had made serious decisions. At 1:45 p.m., I heard voices in the hallway outside my apartment. All 3 of them had arrived together, which told me they'd coordinated their approach. They'd probably spent the drive over strategizing about how to handle their unreasonable daughter and sister. I opened the door before they could knock. Mom, Dad, Madison, please come in. Madison looked terrible. Her hair was unwashed, her eyes were red-rimmed, and she was wearing sweatpants and an old t-shirt, a dramatic departure from her usual, carefully curated appearance. She'd obviously been going for the devastated victim look. Mom looked worried and guilty, the way she always did when forced to choose between keeping the peace and addressing actual problems. Dad looked uncomfortable and slightly annoyed, like he'd been dragged into a situation he'd rather ignore. They settled into my living room with the awkward energy of people who weren't sure what role they were supposed to play in this particular family drama. I remained standing. "Thank you for coming," I said, my voice steady and professional. "I asked you here because we need to have a conversation about Madison's financial abuse, and I want to make sure we're all working with the same information." "Financial abuse?" Mom's voice was sharp with offense. "Rachel, that's a very serious accusation." "You're right, it is." I picked up the first folder and handed it to Dad. These are copies of my credit card statements from the past 6 months, with Madison's unauthorized charges highlighted. The total is $4,147.82. Dad opened the folder and began scanning the pages. His expression grew more serious as he read. "Madison," he said slowly, "did you make these purchases?" Madison's chin jutted out defiantly. "I used Rachel's card for a few things, yes, but she said I could use it for emergencies." "Emergency designer. Handbags?" I asked calmly. "Emergency jewelry? Emergency restaurant meals 3 times a week?" I was going through a hard time. I needed to maintain my professional image for job interviews. "You don't have any job interviews scheduled," I said. "I know because you've been telling Mom you're too depressed to look for work." Madison's face flushed red. That's not. I mean, I have been looking, but the market is really tough right now. I handed Mom the second folder. These are photographs of the jewelry that's missing from my apartment, along with insurance documentation of their value. The total replacement cost is approximately $3,200. Mom opened the folder and gasped when she saw the photos. Madison, you took Rachel's jewelry? I borrowed a few pieces. I was going to return them. Rachel has so much jewelry she never wears half of it. That's not borrowing, Dad said quietly. That's theft. Oh my God, not you too. Madison's voice cracked with manufactured desperation. Why is everyone acting like I'm some kind of criminal? I'm your daughter. I'm Rachel's sister. Since when do we call the police on family? Since family members started committing felonies, I said. The word felonies hit the room like a physical blow. Mom actually gasped. Dad's face went pale. Madison looked like I'd slapped her. Rachel, Mom said shakily. Surely you don't mean… That. I handed her the third folder. This is a summary of all the money I've given Madison over the past 5 years. Loans that were never repaid, bills I paid on her behalf, and cash gifts that were requested as temporary help. The total is $19,000, not including the credit card theft or the stolen jewelry. Dad took the folder from Mom's hands and read through. It? The silence stretched for a full minute while he absorbed the numbers. Jesus Christ, Madison, he finally said. $23,000? It wasn't supposed to be like this, Madison said, and now the tears were starting. Real ones. I thought, though, with Madison it was always hard to tell. I always meant to pay her back. Things kept happening. Bad luck, you know? And Rachel was always so understanding, so generous. I thought… You thought what? I asked. I thought you liked helping me. I thought it made you feel important. The honesty of it was breathtaking. Madison had just admitted that she'd been exploiting my need to feel valued, using my generosity as a weapon against my own financial security. Madison, Dad said slowly, do you understand what you've done here? I made some mistakes. I got in over my head. But I'm family. We're supposed to support each other. Support goes both ways, I said. What have you ever done to support me? Madison's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The question had clearly never occurred to her. I love you. I'm your sister. That's not supported. That's an accident of genetics. Mom found her voice again. Rachel, honey, I understand you're upset, but don't you think you're being a little harsh? Madison made some poor choices, but she's learning. She's growing up. She's 25 years old, Mom. When exactly is she going to finish growing up? When she's 30? 40? When she's stolen $50,000 instead of 23? It wasn't stealing, Madison exploded. It was family money. We share. That's what families do. No, I said, my voice cutting through her hysteria like a blade. That's what parasites do. They take and take and take until there's nothing left. And then they move on to the next host. The room went dead silent. Madison's face crumpled like I'd physically struck her. I can't believe you just called me a parasite, she whispered. I can't believe it took me 12 years to see that's exactly what you are. Dad cleared his throat. Okay, that's enough. Rachel, Madison, you're both upset. Let's try to find a solution here. I have a solution, I said. Madison returns my stolen property, pays me back the money she owes, and stops using my financial accounts. Today. And if she can't do that immediately? Mom asked. Then I file a police report for theft and fraud. I dispute the credit card charges with my bank. And I pursue civil recovery through a small claims court. Madison started crying harder. You'd really call the police on me? Your own sister? My own sister stole from me. Multiple times. For months. While lying to my face about it. I wasn't lying. I was trying to handle it myself. By stealing more? By finding a way to pay you back. But you never gave me a chance. You just cut me off and started threatening me with lawyers. I walked over to my desk and picked up a notebook. Madison, what's your plan to pay me back? What do you mean? I mean specifically? How much money will you pay me each month? When will you start? When will you finish? What's your timeline? Madison looked around the room like someone might rescue her from the question. I need to get a better job first, she said finally. What kind of job? I don't know, something that pays more than the boutique. Have you applied for any jobs? Not yet, but have you looked at job listings? Rachel, this isn't fair. You're putting me on the spot. I'm asking basic questions about your plan to fix the damage you've caused. If you don't have a plan, then you're not actually planning. To pay me back. Of course I'm planning to pay you back. When? Silence. How much? More silence. Madison, I said gently, you don't have a plan because you never intended to pay me back. You intended to keep talking until I finally said no, and then you intended to make me feel guilty for saying no. That's not true, isn't it? Tell me honestly, if I hadn't discovered the credit card charges, how long would you have kept using it? Madison's face went through several expressions before settling on defiant. You gave me permission to use it. For emergencies. Everything was an emergency. My car, my rent, my food, my clothes. I can't help it that life is expensive. Life is expensive for everyone, Madison. Most people solve that problem by getting jobs and earning money. They don't solve it by stealing from their sisters. Dad stood up abruptly. All right, enough. Madison, you're going to return Rachel's jewelry today. All of it. And you're going to work out a payment plan for the money you owe. What if I can't? Pay it all back right away? Madison asked, still sniffling. Then you'll pay what you can, when you can, until it's done, Dad said firmly. And you'll get a real job to make that happen. And if she doesn't? I asked. Dad looked at me with something that might have been respect. Then you do whatever you think is appropriate, Rachel. This is your decision now. Mom looked horrified. We can't just abandon Madison when she's struggling. We're not abandoning her, I said. We're requiring her to take responsibility for her actions. There's a difference. But she's family, Mom said weakly. So am I replied. And I've been taking responsibility for her actions for 12 years. It's her turn now. Madison stood up shakily. Fine, I'll get your stupid jewelry. But I want you to know that this is going to destroy our relationship forever. Madison, I said softly, we haven't had a relationship. We've had a transaction. I've been paying for the privilege of being stolen from and lied to. If that's the only relationship you know how to have with me, then yes, it's over. She stormed out of my apartment without another word. Mom followed her, shooting me one last pleading look that I didn't respond to. Dad stayed behind for a moment. I'm proud of you, he said quietly. I should have seen this years ago. We all should have. Why didn't you? He sighed and ran his hand through his graying hair. Because it was easier to let you handle Madison than to deal with her ourselves. We turned you into her parents so we didn't have to be. That wasn't fair to either of you. It was the first real apology I'd gotten from anyone in my family in as long as I could remember. What happens now? I asked. Now, Madison learns to be an adult, and the rest of us learn to let her fall down sometimes, instead of expecting you to catch her. After he left, I sat alone in my quiet apartment, surrounded by folders of documentation and evidence of a decade's worth of financial abuse. The confrontation was over. The boundaries were drawn. The consequences were clear. For the first time in my adult life, I had said no to my family and meant it. I had stood up for myself without apologizing, without compromising, without accepting anything less than what I deserved. It felt like learning to breathe underwater. My phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer. How did it go? I typed back, I won. And for the first time in 12 years, that was actually true. The jewelry arrived on my doorstep Sunday evening in a crumpled Target bag with no note. Not all of it. My grandmother's sapphire ring was conspicuously absent, along with the gold bracelet from college. But it was enough to show that Madison was taking the consequences seriously, even if she was doing it with maximum passive-aggressive flair. I photographed each returned piece and updated my documentation, then locked everything in a safety deposit box at my bank. If Madison thought she could borrow these items again later when the heat died down, she was mistaken. The real fallout began Monday morning. I was at my desk, responding to client emails and feeling remarkably focused for the first time in months, when my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but the area code was local. Rachel Morrison? The voice was female, young and nervous. Yes, who's calling? This is Ashley from Sunshine Boutique. Your sister Madison works here? Well, I worked here. She didn't show up for her shift this weekend and isn't answering her phone. We found your number listed as her emergency contact. Emergency contact. Of course I was. I'm sorry, I said carefully, but I'm not responsible for Madison's employment issues. You'll need to contact her directly. We've been trying. Her phone goes straight to voicemail, and she hasn't responded to our texts. We just wanted to let someone know that if she doesn't show up today, we'll have to let her go. I felt a flicker of the old panic, the immediate urge to fix Madison's problem before it became a bigger problem for everyone. But I caught myself. I understand that's frustrating, I said. But Madison is an adult, and her work attendance is her responsibility. After I hung up, I realized this was just the beginning. For years, I'd been Madison's unofficial crisis manager, her backup system for when her poor choices caught up with her. Now that system was offline, and the consequences were starting to cascade. Tuesday brought a call from Madison's landlord. Ms. Morrison, this is Dave Chen. I manage the Riverside Apartments. Your sister's rent is 3 weeks late, and she's not returning my calls. The lease shows you as a co-signer, so I wanted to give you a heads up that we're starting eviction proceedings. My stomach dropped. In all my strategic planning, I'd forgotten about the lease I'd co-signed 2 years ago. Madison's housing crisis was legally my crisis, too. Mr. Chen, I need to review that lease agreement. Can you email me a copy? Sure thing. Just so you know, the total amount owed is $2,847, including late fees. If it's not paid by Friday, we'll be filing for eviction. After the call, I spent an hour reading through the lease terms. As co-signer, I was indeed liable for Madison's rent if she couldn't pay. But I also had the right to add or remove my name from the lease with 30 days' notice. I called Mr. Chen back. I'd like to remove myself as co-signer, effective immediately. Well, you can't do that with money already owed, but going forward, if you give written notice, we can remove you from next month's liability. And what happens to Madison if she can't pay this month's rent? Same thing that happens to any tenant who doesn't pay. Eviction. I filled out the paperwork to remove myself from future liability and overnighted it to the property management company. Madison's housing situation was no longer my emergency to solve, but the calls kept coming. Wednesday, Madison's car insurance company, informing me that the policy I'd been automatically paying for the past 18 months was about to lapse because Madison hadn't updated her payment information. I canceled the automatic payment. Thursday, a debt collector looking for Madison, who had apparently listed my phone number on some credit application. I'm not responsible for her debts, I told them, and blocked the number. Friday, a frantic call from my mother. Rachel, Madison is in crisis. She lost her job, she's about to be evicted, and now her car insurance is canceled. She needs help. She needs to get another job and pay her bills, I replied. She's been trying, but she's so depressed about everything that happened with you two. She can barely get out of bed. The manipulation was so transparent, it was almost beautiful. Madison's problems were somehow my fault now, not the natural consequences of her own choices. Mom, Madison lost her job because she stopped showing up for work. She's being evicted because she stopped paying rent. Her insurance was canceled because she hasn't been paying for it. I have. None of this has anything to do with our confrontation. But the timing. The timing is that she's been living beyond her means for years, using my money to subsidize a lifestyle she couldn't afford. Now that she can't access my accounts, reality is catching up with her. She's your sister, Rachel. She needs family support right now. She's had family support for 12 years. What she needs now is to learn how to support herself. Mom was quiet for a long moment. I never thought you could be so cold. I'm not being cold. I'm healthy. That evening, Madison finally called me directly. Her voice was hoarse and shaky. Rachel, I know you're mad at me, but I need help. I'm going to be homeless. You're going to be evicted because you haven't paid rent. I don't have the money. I lost my job, and I can't get another one without a car, and I can't keep my car without insurance. Madison, you had a job. You chose not to show up for it. I was too upset to work. I've been having panic attacks since our fight. I can barely function. Have you seen a doctor about the panic attacks? I can't afford a doctor. There are community health centers that offer sliding scale fees and mental health crisis lines that are free. I don't want to go to some charity clinic, she said, her voice shifting from desperate to indignant. I need real help. By real help, you mean money. I mean support from my family when I'm going through the worst time of my life. Madison, you've been going through the worst time of your life for 5 years. Every crisis has been an emergency that requires my immediate financial intervention. But somehow the crises never end, and you never get better at handling them. That's not fair. What's not fair is that I've been paying for your mistakes for over a decade, while you've learned nothing except how to extract more money from me. She started crying then, big gasping sobs that were designed to make me feel guilty and cruel. 2 weeks ago, they would have worked. Please, Rachel. I'll do anything. I'll get a job. I'll pay you back. I'll change. Just help me one more time. You said that after the cheerleading camp money, and after college, and after I co-signed your lease, and after I paid your rent for 4 months. Every single time you promise to change, but you never do. This time is different. How? Silence. Madison, I need you to understand something. I love you, but I can't keep funding your irresponsibility. Every time I bail you out, I'm preventing you from learning how to handle your own problems. So you're just going to let me become homeless? I'm going to let you experience the consequences of not paying your rent. What you do about that is up to you. I hate you, she whispered, and hung up. I sat in the silence of my apartment, waiting for the guilt to hit. But it didn't come. Instead, I felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. For the first time in years, Madison's crisis wasn't my crisis. Her poor planning wasn't my emergency. Her emotional breakdown wasn't my responsibility to fix. Saturday morning brought an unexpected visitor. I was making coffee when someone knocked on my door. Through the peephole, I saw Derek, Madison's on-again, off-again boyfriend. I opened the door but didn't invite him in. Rachel, we need to talk. About what? About Madison. She's a mess. She's been crying for days. She can't eat. She can't sleep. This thing between you two is destroying her. Madison destroyed herself by stealing from me. Look, I know she made some mistakes, but... Mistakes? Derek, she stole nearly $5,000 from my credit card and hundreds of dollars worth of jewelry from my apartment. That's not a mistake. That's a crime. Derek shifted uncomfortably. She was going to pay you back. With what money? She doesn't have a job. She doesn't have any savings. She doesn't have any assets except the things she stole from me. She's got a family who could help her. I stared at him. Are you seriously standing in my doorway, asking me to give Madison more money so she can pay me back the money she already stole? I'm asking you to think about your sister's mental health. She's talking about dark things. I'm worried about what she might do. The threat was subtle but clear. If I didn't resume supporting Madison financially, whatever happened to her would be my fault. Derek, if Madison is having thoughts of self-harm, she needs professional help. I can give you the number for the crisis hotline. She doesn't need a hotline. She needs her family to support her instead of abandoning her when she's down. I supported her for 12 years. I gave her thousands of dollars, co-signed her lease, paid her bills, and covered her emergencies. That wasn't abandonment. That was empowering. So what? You're just done? After everything you've been through together? I'm done being stolen from. I'm done being lied to. I'm done having my generosity used as a weapon against my own financial security. Derek's face hardened. You know what, Rachel? Madison was right. You are a selfish bitch. I closed the door in his face and called my security company to expedite the installation of my new system. The manipulation attempts continued throughout the week. My mother called every day with updates on Madison's deteriorating situation, each call clearly designed to make me feel guilty enough to intervene. She's staying on Derek's couch now. His parents aren't happy about it. She needs to find her own housing solution. She applied for 3 jobs yesterday but hasn't heard back. That's how job hunting works. She's lost 15 pounds. She's not eating. She can apply for food assistance. Rachel, when did you become so heartless? When I realized that caring too much was making Madison's problems worse, not better. The most revealing call came from my father on Thursday evening. Rachel, I need to ask you something and I want an honest answer. Okay. Is there any way you'd consider helping Madison with her rent this month? Just this once, to keep her from being evicted? Dad, you were there when I showed you the documentation of how much money I've given her over the years. You said you were proud of me for setting boundaries. I am proud of you, but I'm also worried about Madison's safety. Her safety isn't my responsibility. Her choices are. But if something happens to her, then it happens because of decisions she made, not because of decisions I made. Dad was quiet for a long time. I never thought I'd hear you talk like this. You never thought you'd hear me prioritize my own well-being over Madison's comfort? There's a difference. Maybe there is. I don't know how to help her if you won't. Dad, you and Mom have been asking me to help Madison for over a decade. In all that time, have you ever asked how I was doing? Have you ever worried about my financial security or my mental health? Another long silence. I guess we just always figured you were okay. I was okay because I was quietly drowning in debt trying to keep Madison afloat. I was okay because I was sacrificing my own future to fund her present. But I wasn't actually okay. I'm starting to see that. Madison will figure this out, Dad. She's an intelligent adult who's been insulated from consequences her entire life. Once she realizes that nobody else is going to solve her problems for her, she'll start solving them herself. And if she doesn't? Then she'll experience the natural results of not solving them. That's how the world works for everyone else. By the end of the week, I'd received 17 phone calls about Madison's various crises, 12 guilt trip texts, messages from family members, and 1 poorly spelled email from Derek calling me a psychopath for destroying an innocent girl's life. But I'd also received something else, a text from Jennifer, my college roommate. Saw on social media that you're dealing with family drama. Just wanted you to know I'm proud of you for setting boundaries. It's not easy, but it's necessary. Call me if you need to talk. It was the first message I'd received that acknowledged that this situation was difficult for me too, not just for Madison. The first message that didn't assume my job was to fix everything for everyone else. That night, I looked at my bank account balance for the first time in months without anxiety. My credit cards were paid off. My savings account was slowly rebuilding. My financial future was back under my own control. Madison was still in crisis. Derek was still sending me angry messages. My parents were still trying to guilt me into resuming my role as family ATM. But for the first time in my adult life, other people's emergencies weren't automatically my emergencies. Other people's poor choices weren't automatically my problems to solve. The system I'd been trapped in for 12 years was finally broken. And I was the one who had broken it. The guilt trips would continue. The manipulation would escalate. The consequences of Madison's choices would unfold whether I participated or not. But I was done participating. I was done being the solution to problems I hadn't created, for people who treated my generosity like an entitlement rather than a gift. The fallout was exactly as messy as I'd expected it to be. It was also exactly as liberating as I'd hoped it would be. 6 months later, I was sitting in a coffee shop I'd never been to before, in a neighborhood I'd never explored, having lunch with a woman I'd met at a financial literacy workshop. Her name was Carmen, she was a graphic designer, and she was telling me about her decision to cut off her financially abusive brother. The hardest part wasn't saying no, she said, stirring sugar into her latte. It was learning to believe I deserved to say no. I nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. For me, it was realizing that protecting myself wasn't the same thing as hurting them. Yes, like I wasn't responsible for fixing his life. I was responsible for not letting him destroy mine. This is my Tuesday afternoon now. Coffee with Carmen, who had become a genuine friend over the past few months. Not someone who needed something from me, not someone I was trying to help or fix or fund. Just someone who enjoyed my company and had interesting things to say about life, art, and the complicated dynamics of family relationships. It was a revelation, having friendships that weren't based on what I could provide. The financial literacy workshop where we'd met was something I'd started attending in March, part of my ongoing education about healthy money management and boundary setting. The group met twice a month at the community center, and it was full of people who were rebuilding their financial lives after various forms of abuse or exploitation. I'd started going to learn more about protecting myself, but I'd ended up staying because I loved the conversations. People who understood what it meant to have your generosity weaponized against you. People who were learning, like me, that saying no to toxic family members wasn't selfishness. It was survival. Through the group, I'd also started volunteering with a local nonprofit that provided financial counseling to women leaving abusive relationships. Once a week, I helped women understand their credit reports, set up new bank accounts, and create budgets that weren't designed around someone else's demands. The work was meaningful in a way my day job had never been. Every time I helped someone understand that they deserved financial privacy, or that they didn't have to justify their spending to anyone, or that their money was theirs to control, I felt like I was healing a part of myself too. It had taken me months to understand that my relationship with Madison wasn't just financially abusive, it was emotionally abusive too. The constant guilt trips, the way my love was measured by my willingness to give money, the way every boundary I tried to set was labeled as selfishness or cruelty. The therapy helped with that understanding. I'd started seeing Dr. Patricia Williams in February, initially just to process the family conflict. But over time, our sessions had evolved into something deeper. Understanding how I'd learned to equate love with financial sacrifice and how to build relationships based on mutual respect instead of transactions. You know, Dr. Williams had said during one of our recent sessions, healing isn't just about stopping the harmful patterns. It's about creating new patterns that actually serve you. She was right. Breaking free from Madison's financial abuse was only the first step. The real work was learning how to live authentically, how to make decisions based on my own values instead of everyone else's expectations. That work had led to some surprising changes. In April, I got a promotion at work. Not because I was trying harder or working longer hours, but because I was finally able to focus on my career instead of constantly managing financial crises at home. My supervisor, Jennifer Kim, had noticed the change immediately. "You seem more confident lately," she'd said during my performance review. "More decisive. Whatever you're doing, keep it up." The promotion came with a significant salary increase, which I was using to rebuild my savings and start investing for the first time in my life. It felt surreal, having money that was actually mine to keep, that wasn't earmarked for someone else's emergency or poor planning. I'd also moved to a new apartment in May. Nothing dramatic, just a one-bedroom place in a nicer neighborhood, with better security and a view of the park. But it was the first time I'd ever chosen where to live based purely on what I wanted, rather than what I could afford after covering everyone else's expenses. The apartment felt like a physical manifestation of my new boundaries. Clean, organized, and completely under my control. No spare keys distributed to family members. No one else's belongings cluttering my space. No one else's financial emergencies determine how much I could spend on rent. Madison had never been inside it. She didn't even know where it was. The relationship with my parents had evolved too, though not in the way I'd expected. Dad had been making genuine efforts to understand the situation and his role in enabling Madison's behavior. We'd had several long conversations over the past few months, and while they were sometimes uncomfortable, they were honest in a way our relationship had never been before. "I've been thinking about what you said," he'd told me during a call in June, "about how we never asked how you were doing. We just assumed you were fine because you always handled everything so well." "I wasn't fine, Dad. I was drowning." "I know that now, and I'm sorry. We put you in an impossible position, and then we criticized you when you finally got out of it." Mom was struggling more with the new dynamic. She still called occasionally, with updates about Madison's latest crisis, though she'd stopped directly asking me to intervene. The subtext was always there. Madison needed help, Madison was struggling, maybe I could reconsider my harsh stance. But she'd learned that I wasn't going to engage with the manipulation anymore. "Your mother loves both of you," Dad had explained. "But she's afraid that if Madison doesn't have you to fall back on, something terrible might happen to her." "Something terrible might happen to anyone, Dad. That doesn't mean I'm responsible for preventing it. I know. Your mother is learning that too, but it's harder for her." As for Madison herself, the news filtered back to me through family calls and social media glimpses. She'd eventually found a roommate situation that kept her from being homeless. She'd gotten a new job at a retail store that paid slightly better than the boutique. She'd broken up with Derek, apparently because his parents had gotten tired of supporting her by proxy. The crises had continued for a while. Unpaid bills, car troubles, various dramatic emergencies that mysteriously resolved themselves when no financial rescue appeared. But gradually, she'd started handling these problems herself. Not always well, and not without plenty of complaining, but she was doing it. It turned out that when Madison couldn't rely on my money to solve her problems, she was perfectly capable of solving them herself. She just hadn't bothered to learn how while the Rachel ATM was operational. I felt no satisfaction in her struggles, but I felt no guilt about them either. They were the natural consequences of years of poor financial choices, and experiencing those consequences was the only way she was going to learn to make better ones. The most significant change in my life, though, was the relationship I'd started building with myself. For the first time in my adult life, I was making decisions based on what I actually wanted rather than what other people needed from me. I'd taken a weekend trip to Boston in July, just because I'd always wanted to see the city. I'd bought myself a beautiful piece of jewelry to replace what Madison had stolen. Not because I needed it, but because I liked it and I could afford it. I'd started taking a pottery class on Thursday evenings, something I'd been interested in for years but had never made time for when I was constantly managing other people's emergencies. These weren't grand gestures or life-changing adventures. They were small acts of self-respect, tiny declarations that my wants and needs mattered too. The pottery class was where I'd met David, a software engineer who was dealing with his own family boundary issues. We'd started talking after class one evening, comparing stories about relatives who treated love like a transaction. He'd asked me out for coffee the following week. Our relationship was developing slowly, built on actual compatibility rather than crisis management or financial entanglement. He paid for his own meals, handled his own problems, and seemed genuinely interested in who I was, rather than what I could do for him. It was a foreign concept, dating someone who didn't need to be rescued. "You know what I love about you?" He'd said during dinner the previous weekend. "You're so calm, like centered. You don't create drama or chaos. You just exist peacefully." I'd laughed at that. "Trust me, I haven't always been peaceful." "Maybe not. But you are now. Whatever work you've done to get here, it shows. The work." That was exactly what it had been. Deliberate, conscious work to unlearn 12 years of toxic patterns and replace them with healthy ones. It was work that was ongoing. I still felt the occasional guilt pang when I heard about Madison's struggles. I still had to consciously remind myself that other people's problems weren't automatically my problems. I still had to practice saying no without immediately following it with an apology or explanation, but it was getting easier. Each time I chose my own well-being over someone else's demands, the choice became more natural. Each time I experienced the peace that came with healthy boundaries, I became more committed to maintaining them. Last month, I'd gotten a call from my uncle, my mom's brother, who I hadn't spoken to in over a year. He'd heard about the situation with Madison and wanted to share his perspective. "You know, Rachel, I went through something similar with my son Mark about 10 years ago," he'd said. "Different details, but same basic pattern. I was funding his life while he learned nothing except how to ask for more money." "What did you do?" "Same thing you did. I cut him off completely. His mother thought I was being cruel, but I knew it was the only way he'd ever learn to stand on his own feet." "How did it work out?" "Well, Mark hated me for about 2 years, but now he's got a steady job, his own apartment, and a savings account. And more importantly, he has self-respect. He thanks me now for forcing him to grow up." "Do you think Madison will ever thank me?" "Maybe. Maybe not. But that's not why you did it, is it?" He was right. I hadn't set boundaries with Madison to teach her a lesson or to force her to change. I'd done it to protect myself, to reclaim my own financial security and emotional well-being. Whether Madison learned anything from the experience was up to her. That conversation had crystallized something I'd been thinking about for months. My worth wasn't measured by other people's gratitude or approval. I didn't need Madison to thank me for setting healthy boundaries, and I didn't need my parents to applaud my decision to stop being their fix-it person. I just needed to keep choosing myself, day after day, decision after decision. 3 weeks ago, I'd gotten an unexpected text from Madison. The first direct communication we'd had since her angry phone call 6 months earlier. "Hey, Rachel. I know things have been weird between us, but I wanted you to know I got promoted to assistant manager at work. Just thought you might want to know." I'd stared at the message for a long time, analyzing it for hidden requests or manipulation tactics. But it seemed genuine, just someone sharing good news with family. I texted back, "Congratulations, that's great news." She'd responded with a simple, "Thanks." No request for money. No guilt trip about our estrangement. No attempt to leverage the good news into a conversation about reconciliation. Just normal sibling communication about a life milestone. It was the first healthy interaction we'd had in over a decade. I didn't know if it meant anything long-term. I didn't know if Madison was genuinely learning to manage her own life, or if this was just a temporary improvement before the next crisis. But for the first time, I found that I didn't need to know. Madison's growth was her responsibility. My growth was mine, and I was growing into someone who said no without apologizing, into someone who helped others from a place of genuine choice rather than guilty obligation, into someone who understood that love wasn't measured by financial sacrifice, into someone who finally understood that the most generous thing I could do for my family was to stop enabling their dysfunction and start modeling what healthy boundaries looked like. Sitting in that coffee shop with Carmen, talking about the complicated journey from financial abuse to financial freedom, I realized that I'd become someone I actually liked, someone whose company I enjoyed, someone whose future I was excited about. For 28 years, I'd been so busy taking care of everyone else that I'd never learned to take care of myself. Now I was discovering what it felt like to live a life that was actually mine. It felt like coming home to a place I'd never been before. It felt like the beginning of everything I'd been too afraid to want. It felt like freedom. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.